It's been a great ride. 5 years just has flown by. I can't believe it's been 5 years that I've been here. 5 years ago, it seemed like 5 years was forever in the future, and now I'm looking back and it seems like a day ago that I got here. And going to Washington was the next step, I think, in something that I felt I always hoped I could do, and that was to really run an organization that had an impact in environment, health, and safety. And I always thought it would be a corporate position, but actually it turned out that its fate would have it that it would be at the Chemical Safety Board. The mission has been always to promote prevention of industrial chemical accidents. And while that sounds like a coined phrase, it really is the boil down of what all of us are trying to do and have tried to do, I think, for quite a long time. Really, I think the way things worked out with this agency, I'm very, very happy with the way things worked out. I'm always eager for things to happen faster, but you know, the agency matured to a point where it could take on, and we had the right people in place at the right time to take on an incident like BP and turn it into a world impacting safety study. We never wish the accident had happened, but I do think that it is a symbol of problems that exist in industry and will always be there, preventing full implementation of process safety. And the agency was able to identify those and to shed a light on them that other people now are able to recognize them in their own companies and are beginning to look for them and change things so that their operations are safer than probably ever before. And I think that result is something that this agency will be able to be proud of, I think, for many, many years to come. Yes, there are more BPs out there. There are companies who just don't get it. There are companies who will not pay attention. They think that was BP and BP was really bad and they're not anywhere near that bad. And as a result, they don't really need to pay that much attention to what happened at BP. That's a tragedy, but I think it's going to be a case that there will be more BPs unless people out there are paying attention. But BP is not alone, but BP was a pretty gross example of how bad it can get. It is emotional. That was his last story. I think, you know, first of all, I sat there in just complete awe that I was sitting in front of Ed Bradley, who I've watched do interviews forever, since, you know, however long 60 Minutes been on. That tape that I have is a very significant culmination, I think, of a career. I mean, how many people get to have that opportunity to be asked to come and talk professionally about a very significant event in this nation's industry's experience. People are not expendable, and people who work in industry should not be considered the cost of doing business. They are people, human beings with lives and with hearts and souls and families, and they should be protected in every way possible. I think we remember the victims, and in our public meetings or in our press conferences, we remember the victims, and it's for them and their families that we try to prevent this from happening again. I often say that if corporate boards spend as much time worrying about the safety of their people as they do about tracking their money, there would be a lot less injuries, accidents in industry. You have to spend as much time not just looking at the fiduciary responsibilities but looking at the real assets of your corporation, and that is your people and your facilities. And blowing them up or burning them down makes no sense from a fiduciary perspective. I think there's a real moral obligation for companies who say they value people to value people more than they value equipment and their facilities. People are irreplaceable and they should be protected. And the boards of directors who do not have that as a moral compass really are missing the bet. Like I've said often, voluntary standards just don't work because not everybody volunteers. So you have to have the regulation that sets the groundwork for the minimum compliance that companies need to uphold. And then enforcement has to be there. If it's just there as a regulation and there's no enforcement, many companies don't feel that they have to do it. There's so many things to comply with, they're going to pay attention to the ones that they're going to be held accountable for. And when I came and found how many companies were not complying with regulation, or I found there were just gaps in regulation that really needed to be plugged up in order for operations to have a chance of being safe, I felt no problems whatsoever with making those recommendations or supporting the recommendations and working to get those recommendations for new regulation put into place. You know, we haven't made that many. I mean, there have been really a handful that have been made, but I really think they've been well documented. I think there's good evidence for them, and for that reason, I think it would have been other than ethical to ignore them and just recommend a best practice. I think in some instances we have to, as leaders, make those hard decisions and go the direction that the evidence takes us. I pray that the agency continues to grow and continues to be influential. You know, be influential. What can you change? Don't just go to sleep. It'll be easy to just work your day-to-day job and collect your paycheck and be here 20 years from now. But what have you changed? I think making sure that we recognize that we've proven that a small group of people focused on a mission can make change happen. And we've just got to continue that as an agency and really make things happen. What I'd like to see the agency do is continue to build on the work that it's done. Remember, all of these investigations resulted in really important recommendations, really important lessons learned. How do you get those lessons out to the broadest possible audience so that these accidents don't happen anywhere else? And how do you continue to build on what we've learned in the BP investigation, and that is that root causes don't stop with the event or the broken widget, that they really go to the deepest culture of an organization, and until those cultures change, you're just not going to be able to prevent accidents from happening. This agency has learned that, and getting that message out and carrying that message forward in our future investigations and our outreach, our videos and other things is just critically important to its future. Those two words, breast cancer, can be pretty scary. But if you let it stop you and you don't move forward, look at what 5 years, 7 years from the diagnosis has done. I mean, I've lived 5 wonderful years, 7 wonderful years. This has been the most wonderful experience of my life, being here professionally at the CSB. Well, I hope they remember me as being able to lead. You know, leading people doesn't necessarily mean just getting them to follow you. What it means is taking them in directions they may not even know they need to go. I hope they'll see me not as a dictator, but as a leader that brought them along with patience, persistence, and with a mentoring spirit, that I really enjoyed every person and saw value in every single one of the people who worked here. I hope that's how I'm remembered.